I met Travis at my friend's bonfire in 2015. And honestly, it was like something out of a movie. He was 25. I was 24. And there was just this instant connection. He was standing by the fire talking about his work in HVAC, and most guys would have made it sound boring. But he had this way of explaining things that made you actually want to listen. Plus, he was gorgeous, tall, broad shoulders, these amazing green eyes that just locked onto you when he talked. I remember thinking that night that I'd finally found someone who was actually worth my time. The first year was absolutely perfect. We'd spend entire weekends together, going to farmers markets and trying new restaurants. And he was always planning these sweet little surprises. Like, he'd show up with my favorite coffee just because he was thinking about me. Or he'd remember some random thing I mentioned wanting to do and actually follow through on it. When he asked me to move in with him after a year, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I was practically living there already anyway, and it just made sense. Our wedding in October 2017 was everything I'd ever dreamed of. Small but elegant, just our families and closest friends. And Travis looked so handsome in his navy suit. During our vows, he promised to always put our relationship first and to never take me for granted. And I actually got a little teary-eyed because I could tell he really meant it. Everyone kept saying what a perfect couple we were. And honestly, they weren't wrong. We just fit together in this amazing way that made everything easy. But somewhere around year 6 of our marriage, things started feeling different. Not bad exactly. Just routine. Travis would come home from work. We'd eat dinner while watching Netflix. And then he'd disappear into his phone or start organizing something in the garage. It was like I'd become part of the furniture or something. I'd try to start conversations about my day. But he'd give these half-listening responses while scrolling through sports news or HVAC supply websites. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there looking cute in the outfits I actually put thought into, and he barely even notices. I started feeling like we were just roommates who happened to share a bed. We'd go through our daily routines without really connecting, and when I'd try to bring up doing something fun together, he'd agree, but then suggest the same 3 restaurants we always went to. It was like he'd gotten comfortable and stopped trying to actually see me as a person, instead of just his wife who handled the household stuff and looked good at work parties. That's when I met Randy at the grocery store. I was in the produce section trying to pick out avocados which is honestly more complicated than it should be, when this guy walked up and complimented my earrings. They were these cute little gold hoops I'd gotten at this boutique downtown. And I was so surprised that someone had actually noticed them. Travis definitely hadn't said anything about them, even though I'd worn them specifically hoping he'd comment. Randy was probably in his early 30s, really well dressed in this casual but put together way, and he had this smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We ended up talking for like 20 minutes about everything from, avocado selection to weekend plans, and it was just so refreshing to have someone actually engage with me like I was interesting. When he asked for my number, I almost said no automatically, but then I thought, what's wrong with having a friend? It's not like Travis and I never talked to other people. The texting started out completely innocent. Randy would send me funny memes or ask how my day was going. And it was nice having someone who seemed genuinely curious about my life. He'd remember little details from previous conversations and follow up on them, which was more attention than I'd gotten from Travis in months. Like, if I mentioned having a stressful meeting at work, Randy would check in the next day to see how it went. Meanwhile, Travis would ask, how was work? And then immediately start talking about his own day before I could even answer. Over the next few months, Randy and I started texting more regularly. He'd send me pictures of interesting things he'd see during his day. Cool architecture, funny signs, beautiful sunsets, and I started doing the same. It felt like having this little window into someone else's world. Someone who actually appreciated the small details that make life interesting. Travis never sent me pictures of anything unless it was a screenshot of a funny review for some tool he wanted to buy. I know some people might think it was inappropriate, but honestly, I was just enjoying having a real connection with someone again. Randy would ask thoughtful questions about my opinions on things, and we'd have these long conversations about movies and books and places we wanted to travel. It reminded me what it felt like to be seen as more than just someone who splits the electric bill and remembers to buy groceries. The weirdest part was how easy it became to compartmentalize everything. I'd spend my day texting Randy and feeling appreciated and interesting, and then I'd come home and slip right back into the routine with Travis like nothing had changed. I'd make dinner. We'd eat while watching TV. And I'd sleep next to him like everything was completely normal. It's not like I was planning anything or trying to hurt anyone. I was just finally getting the attention and conversation I'd been missing. By Sunday night in our 6th year of marriage, I'd been thinking a lot about what I actually wanted from my life. Travis and I were sitting on the couch during a commercial break, and I realized this was probably the most honest conversation we'd had in weeks. He was scrolling through his phone, barely paying attention to the show we were supposedly watching together. And I just felt this wave of clarity about how disconnected we'd become. "Can we talk?" I asked. And he looked up with this slightly annoyed expression like I was interrupting something important, which was just typical. His phone was always more interesting than anything I had to say. "I think we need a break," I said. And I was actually proud of how mature and calm I sounded. A lot of people would have just started a fight or made accusations, but I was trying to handle this like an adult who wanted to actually solve our problems instead of just complaining about them. Travis set his phone down and looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. "That's not how marriage works." "Michelle, please just think about it," I said. "We're not connecting anymore, and maybe some space would help us figure out what we actually want." I wasn't asking for anything crazy, just some time to breathe and evaluate where we were. Couples do this all the time when they're smart enough to address problems before they get worse. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "I'll think about it," which honestly surprised me because I'd expected him to get all defensive and start arguing about how everything was fine. Instead, he seemed like he was actually considering what I'd said, which felt like progress. That night, I went to bed feeling cautiously optimistic that we might actually be able to work through this rough patch. Travis seemed calmer than usual, and I thought maybe he was finally understanding that I wasn't trying to attack him or blame him for anything, and I was just being honest about needing something different, which took a lot of courage to say out loud. The next week was actually really nice. Travis seemed more relaxed and present, and I started thinking about what I might want to do with some space to figure things out. Maybe I'd take that photography class I'd been talking about, or finally plan that trip to visit my college friends. Randy had been asking if I wanted to meet for coffee sometime, and I thought maybe during a break would be the perfect time to explore new friendships without feeling guilty about it. Travis was being surprisingly sweet all week, bringing me coffee in the morning and asking about my plans for the day. It felt like he was finally taking my concerns seriously and making an effort to be more present. I started thinking that maybe this break idea was exactly what we needed. Some space to appreciate each other and come back together stronger. Friday afternoon, I was at home organizing my closet and thinking about what I might want to pack if I stayed at my sister Rachel's place for a few weeks. When someone knocked on the door, I figured it was a delivery or maybe one of the neighbors. But when I opened it, there was this official-looking guy with a clipboard asking if I was Michelle Henderson. "You've been served," he said, and handed me this thick envelope before walking back to his car like it was the most normal thing in the world. I stood there staring at the papers, and when I saw a petition for dissolution of marriage at the top, I honestly thought there had been some kind of mistake. Travis was at work, and I kept reading the same lines over and over trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Irreconcilable differences, division of assets. It was like someone had taken our conversation about needing space and twisted it into this completely insane legal document. I called him immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. And then I realized he'd probably planned this whole thing. I spent the entire weekend crying and calling off work Monday because I literally couldn't function. My parents kept asking what I'd done to make him so angry. Like, this was somehow my fault instead of Travis completely overreacting to a perfectly reasonable request for some space. I'd been trying to save our marriage by addressing our problems honestly, and his response was to lawyer up and file for divorce like some kind of vindictive teenager. The worst part was that he wouldn't even talk to me. I drove to his brother Marcus's house because I figured that's where he was staying. And I sat outside for 20 minutes banging on the door and calling his name. I could see his truck in the driveway, so I knew he was in there just ignoring me, like a coward. All I wanted was 5 minutes to explain that he'd completely misunderstood what I was asking for. But apparently that was too much to expect from someone I'd been married to for 6 years. Marcus finally came outside and told me Travis didn't want to see me and that I needed to leave, or he'd call the police. The police? Like I was some kind of dangerous criminal instead of a wife trying to talk to her husband about a major misunderstanding. It was absolutely humiliating. And I couldn't believe Travis was letting his brother treat me like that after everything we'd been through together. I tried texting him, calling him, even messaging him on social media, but he'd blocked me everywhere. It was like I'd ceased to exist. which was honestly the cruelest thing he could have done. I wasn't asking him to take me back or pretend nothing had happened. I just wanted the basic respect of a conversation about why he jumped straight to divorce over something we could have worked out in counseling. When we finally got to court, I begged the judge to pause the proceedings so we could try marriage counseling first. I explained that this was all a big misunderstanding and that we just needed professional help to communicate better. Travis had been the love of my life for over 6 years, and I wasn't ready to give up on us without at least trying to fix things properly. But when the judge asked Travis if he was willing to work on the marriage, he just looked at me with these cold, dead eyes and said, "I'm not," like it was the easiest question in the world. No hesitation. No emotion. Just complete rejection of everything we'd built together. I couldn't believe the man I'd married was capable of being so heartless and final about something as important as our relationship. The whole process dragged on for almost a year. And Travis never once tried to have an actual conversation with me about what had gone wrong. He just hid behind his lawyer and acted like I was some kind of stranger he was doing business with instead of someone he'd promised to love and cherish. Meanwhile, I was the one actually trying to save our marriage and figure out where we'd gone off track. I ended up posting about it on Facebook because I needed support from my friends. And honestly, people deserve to know what kind of person Travis really was underneath all that nice guy act. I talked about how he was being emotionally manipulative by refusing to communicate, and how narcissistic it was to file for divorce without even trying counseling first. Some of our mutual friends sent him screenshots, which just proved my point about him being vindictive and trying to control the narrative. When we finally signed the papers, I felt like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. We were supposed to be the couple that figured it out and came back stronger. Instead, Travis had turned one honest conversation about needing space into this complete destruction of everything we'd built together. I kept thinking he'd change his mind at the last minute, but he signed those papers like he was buying groceries. The first few months after the divorce were honestly the hardest of my life. I stayed in our old rental house because I couldn't bear to move somewhere completely new. And every room reminded me of how good things used to be before Travis decided to give up on us. I tried dating this older guy who had money and seemed stable, but it was hard to connect with anyone when I was still processing how badly Travis had handled our problems. I heard through mutual friends that he'd started his own HVAC business with Marcus and was doing really well, which honestly just made me more frustrated. Here I was struggling to rebuild my entire life, and he was out there thriving like our marriage had meant nothing to him. It was like he'd been planning his exit strategy the whole time and just waiting for an excuse to use it. 4 months after our divorce was finalized, my sister Rachel came over looking all nervous and fidgety, which usually meant she had gossip she wasn't sure she should share. We were sitting in my kitchen drinking wine, and she kept starting sentences and then stopping herself, until finally I told her to just spit it out already. "I've been seeing Travis," she said, and for a second I thought she meant like running into him around town or something. But then she kept talking, and I realized she meant seeing him, like dating him, like sleeping with him. My own sister had been hooking up with my ex-husband while I was still trying to process the divorce. The betrayal was absolutely unreal. Rachel had always been jealous of me. She was prettier in that obvious way that guys notice immediately, but I'd always been the one with the serious relationships and the stable life. Now, she was telling me she'd had a crush on Travis for years and finally decided to do something about it after we split up. Like our marriage ending was some kind of opportunity for her instead of the most devastating thing that had ever happened to me. I completely lost it on her. I mean, there are rules about these things. You don't date your sister's ex-husband, especially not 4 months after a divorce that destroyed her entire life. But Rachel just sat there acting like I was being unreasonable and dramatic, saying they were both adults and I didn't get to control who they dated now that we were divorced. The selfishness was just incredible. Our parents had to get involved because Rachel and I got into this huge screaming fight at Sunday dinner. And now family gatherings are completely awkward because we can barely be in the same room together. She ruined our relationship over some guy who clearly has commitment issues, considering how easily he threw away 6 years of marriage. But apparently she thought she was different and special enough to change him. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 months before Travis ended it, which honestly didn't surprise me at all. Rachel came crying to me afterward, saying he told her it was too complicated and he needed space to focus on his business. I almost laughed because it was so typical of him to use someone and then discard them. The second things got inconvenient. At least now, Rachel knew what it felt like to be abandoned by Travis when he decided you weren't worth the effort anymore. It's been almost a year since our divorce was finalized, and Travis still has me blocked on everything. Like, I'm some kind of dangerous stalker instead of someone who was married to him for 6 years. I've tried reaching out a few times through mutual friends because I think we should be able to have a civil conversation about how things ended. But he apparently prefers to just pretend I never existed rather than deal with any awkwardness. He bought his own townhouse and seems to be doing great with his business, posting pictures on social media of work trips and new equipment like he's some kind of successful entrepreneur now. Meanwhile, I'm still in our old rental house trying to figure out how to rebuild my life after he completely upended everything over one conversation about taking a break to work on our problems. The worst part is how he's managed to make himself look like the victim in all of this. People act like he's this mature, stable guy who made a clean break from a bad situation, when really he's just someone who gave up on his marriage the second it required actual effort. He never tried counseling, never attempted to understand my perspective, never even asked what I meant when I said I needed space. He just went straight to divorce, like that was the reasonable response to his wife, trying to communicate about feeling disconnected. I still don't understand how asking for a break to figure things out became grounds for ending a 6-year marriage. People take breaks all the time when they're going through rough patches. It's called being mature enough to recognize when you need perspective before making permanent decisions. But Travis turned it into this dramatic rejection and made me look like the bad guy for being honest about our problems, instead of just suffering in silence. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if he'd actually listened to what I was trying to tell him, instead of immediately jumping to the worst possible conclusion. We could have gone to counseling, taken some time apart to miss each other, and come back together with a better understanding of what we both needed. Instead, he chose to blow up our entire life together and act like I was crazy for thinking we could work through a rough patch like adults. The whole experience taught me that some people just aren't capable of fighting for their relationships when things get difficult. Travis was great when everything was easy and fun, but the second I tried to address real problems, he ran away and hid behind lawyers instead of having the courage to actually work on things. It's honestly sad that someone I loved for so long turned out to be such a coward when it really mattered. Now I'm dating again and trying to move forward. But it's hard to trust that someone won't just disappear the moment you're honest about needing something different. Travis set the bar pretty low for how to handle relationship problems. So I guess at least I know what red flags to watch out for next time. But I still can't believe that 6 years of marriage meant so little to him that he'd rather start over completely than spend even one session in counseling trying to understand each other better.